It's time for Tab Talks, your weekly conversation about matters of faith. I'm your host, Jennifer Rash.
And I'm your co-host, Debbie Campbell.
We are talking missions legacies and history and all kinds of famous people who have made a difference that you may or may not have heard of through the years. And we have a person that I'm going to predict will be one of those topics, will be a book herself one day. We have with us Rosalie Hunt. Welcome, Rosalie.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
All right, so Rosalie is an author as well as she spent 30 years on the mission field herself. She grew up on the mission field as a missionary kid, and so she's got all kinds of experience with missions. Also loves history, so she was the perfect person to start writing the histories and the stories and all of these different missions leaders, especially women, through the years, and has just completed her latest book on Kathleen Mallory. Tell us the title of the new book that is currently at the printer.
Actually, the book cover just went today to the printer.
Yay!
And it's going to be Guided by Grace, the Kathleen Mallory Story.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, give us a quick snippet of who is Kathleen Mallory.
Kathleen, more than any other one person, has served as WMU's head 36 years, the longest tenure of any director and the most single influential director in the history of Women's Missionary Union. And the older generation knew her. She was called the sweetheart of Alabama because she came from Selma, Alabama. But the new generation needs to know her as well, because we are still being influenced by what she did 50 years ago.
So what all did she do? What are some of the things that she did that had a great influence for us?
My goodness. She became executive director when she was a young 33 years old.
Wow.
So I always think, what was I doing at 33? I've been at the helm of Women's Missionary Union. She was that 3 years in Alabama and then was selected as the national executive director. And during her tenure, she literally saved the Foreign Mission Board and the Home Mission Board from bankruptcy. She kept WMU and basically the Southern Baptist Convention solvent through the Great Depression, World War I, and World War II. We owe her a great debt of gratitude. And so much of what we do now is on the foundation which she laid for us all those years ago.
So this is not only missions history, but this is leadership skills.
Absolutely. Gracious, gentle. In fact, her nickname among Southern Baptist men, most of the leadership, you understand, was men, and she was the sole woman in that high a position. Their name for her was the Tiny Dynamo.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That nearly became the title of the book.
I can understand. That would be a great catch right there. Well, tell us some of the other leaders, the missions leaders that you featured in other books.
I began with Ann Judson. Ann and Adoniram Judson, our very first missionaries who have influenced all the rest. In fact, Ann Judson, more than any other one single woman, has influenced the course of Baptist missions, especially among women and among everybody. So the books I've written about all will hark back to Ann Judson. She went in 1812, and now here we are in 2020, and we're still feeling her influence. She was the one who sparked a little woman in South Carolina, Hephzibah Jenkins Townsend, to start the first society in 1810 that ended up becoming Women's Missionary Union in 1888. And we're now the largest single women's missionary organization in the world. So all of that, we say, thank you, Ann Judson, and thank you, Hephzibah. And then the next book I wrote was about Fannie Heck. She served longer than anybody as our national president. And she was highly influential. She began the RAs, GAs, YWAs began in her tenure. She's the one that started state missions, the names of our mission offerings. She started mission study. She started the magazine that's now Missions Mosaic. All this began with Fannie Heck. And for 3 years, Fannie and Kathleen worked together as a wonderful team.
And you've written on those. So you're tying all of these leaders who work together, but also maybe were influenced by one another, different time periods. You're tying all of these stories together.
And part of it, one of the reasons this came about is because in 2011, I live in the past. I was talking 1900.
Hey, I love it.
In 2011, Wanda Lee, who was executive director at that time of Women's Missionary Union, asked me to write the 125th anniversary history of Women's Missionary Union. We've had one written every 25 years since organization. First one was in 1913, written by Fannie Heck herself in royal service. And the first copy I ever used of that was my mother's own copy. Then in 1938, Kathleen Boone Cox, who was our national president, wrote the 50th, the Jubilee edition. And then in 1976, Alma Hunt, so many people living now know Alma Hunt, wrote the 75th version. That was 1966. Then 1988, Catherine Allen wrote that wonderful large book of the history of 100 years of Women's Missionary Union. So mine came out in 2014. The story, we've a story to tell, 125 years of WMU. And in writing that, I learned so many new things about people I thought I knew. I learned so much about Annie Armstrong and Lottie Moon. I discovered that when Lottie Moon wrote that famous letter back to America, pleading for women in churches to give a missions offering so more missionaries could go, was written the summer she lived in the town where I grew up in China, Zhenjiang, and she lived in our house. And I like to think we shared the same bedroom, and I didn't even know I was sleeping in history. It was pretty wonderful.
Wow. You're definitely the right person to be writing all of these stories.
Well, it was thrilling to learn about all these women, more about them. And I learned about Hephzibah Jenkins Townsend and the one who had started it. And so I began researching in Charleston, and that was a fabulous experience.
So did you I know you were a child of missionaries and you're missionary yourself, you and Bob. So did it just kind of evolve for you to develop this love and begin writing these books? Or was there something that just suddenly sparked your interest to do this?
You know, Debbie, I have wondered about that myself sometime. I certainly never set out to write. I've always loved history. Now, when my brother and I, for a year or a little more, were the only 2 foreign children in our city of Zhenjiang, a city at that time of about 300,000 people. Now it has nearly 2 million people. But I had Chinese friends, but they didn't share my interest in American reading. So our chief activity at home was reading. And I loved to dig into history. I thought history was fascinating. I didn't know history was supposed to be boring. So I loved it. And I love to say that one day I would become an archaeologist and dig up history. And I remember one time when I was a little girl, I found a little piece of green stone in our front yard. And I thought, this is a piece of jade. This is really old. And I want to be an archaeologist. Well, I have begun digging up history. So maybe I have.
It was there right from the beginning, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Well, how do you go about digging up the history? What are some of your secrets?
Well, I really don't have any secrets. I know that the fun part is research. I love archives. Archivists are some of my favorite people. And I could just lose myself in archives. But then it comes, you have to come to the writing time. That is the discipline. But I like to write something by picturing what was going on in the minds of these people. When I was writing about Ann Judson, I liked to, what was she feeling? What was she thinking? What was this doing to her? And then I like to sort of put us in that place. And like I'm having a film rolling and I'm looking at what they're doing and trying to record it as I hear them talk and work. So I guess that's how it came about.
You know, Debbie, I've read several of Rosalie's books, and they really do put you there. I mean, you feel like you're in that moment. You can smell and see and hear what's happening around you. So you do a fantastic job, Rosalie. How do you decide what stays and what goes? Because you can't put it all in.
Oh my. I remember the first book I wrote, Bless God and Take Courage, the Judson History and Legacy. I had twice as many pages as the publisher would use. And I kept cutting. They said, cut some more. And I cut some more. And finally, they said, you have to cut 30 more pages. And I said, this is it. It's like I'm cutting on my own body. I can't keep cutting this thing anymore. So it's really hard to know what to leave out. And it's so easy to chase rabbits because they have so many interesting stories and you don't have time to tell them all. It's a challenge. It really is. One reason I first started writing about the Judsons harks back to my name. My middle name is Ann, named for my grandmother, South Carolina grandmother, who was named Ann Judson Fogle Wells.
Wow.
Lots of girls back in those days were named for Ann Judson. And she was literally named Ann Judson Fogle. So when I was a little girl, I thought the Judsons were part of our family.
Oh.
And now I know they are.
Mm.
They really are.
You really do have a lot of connections. All right, so I have to know who is already thinking about writing your story.
Don't even think about that. I will tell you, I promised the children about 15 years ago that I would write some China stories.
Oh, good.
And after I sent this book in the first of this month, I thought, I am now without excuse.
Mm-hmm.
But I promise you, I've already found it a lot more difficult to write in the first person than to write in the third person. And you won't even believe the research. Just in these 3 weeks, I have gone through over 1,000 family letters, and I have about 3 times more to go through. I may not live long enough, but I want to get through this and record some of the stories of my mom and my dad and my Aunt Grace, who lived next door, to pass the story on. It's so important that we all leave a legacy.
We are talking with Rosalie Hunt. She's an author, historian, longtime missionary, grew up on the mission field herself as a missionary kid, and just has a love for telling the mission story through the eyes of leaders who have made a difference in missions. So Rosalie, you're talking about your own experience a little bit now. If you could just put it in a summary, tell us a little bit about from being a child and a missionary kid, and then going back as a missionary yourself. What were some of the pieces and parts that you learned and that you would definitely include in your story, this one that you're starting to write?
The watershed experience in my life came in China, in Zhenjiang, on Christmas Day of 1947. We had 2 houses on the side of a hill. One of those was the house where Lottie Moon lived one summer. And we had a gate, a wall around our home because of the danger of bandits. And so we usually knew when somebody came because they would knock at the gate and someone would admit them. But that Christmas morning, we had a knock at our front porch. And I said I would go to the door, and we had a large screened-in porch, and I didn't see anybody. And then I looked down, and there was a beggar kneeling on the steps. And he had his hand stretched up to me. And I looked at his face. I looked at his feet, no shoes. He did not have one complete finger. Part of his ears were eaten away. I knew at once that this man was a leper. And he said to me, Chinge wo mimbar chuba. Well, Ursula, please give me a little bread. I'm starving. I went to the kitchen and got biscuit and bread we'd had that morning. And when I came back to the steps, the beggar had not moved. He still had his hands stretched up. And I took the bread and placed it in his hands. And he was shaking so badly that 2 of the biscuit dropped on the steps. And I will never forget, he picked up every little crumb. He said, Bunam Zalta, Ursula, Ursula, I can't waste any. I'm starving. And I stood there. I was a 9-year-old child, and God spoke to me in that moment. And I vowed, God, someday, let me tell people like this that you are the bread of life. I never saw that man again. I never knew his name, but God used him to change my life. So from that point on, I was pointed in the direction of sharing that bread.
I can tell this is the beginning of your book.
That'll be the first chapter, probably.
And you know, what a great story. I know Rosalie had us both captivated by that.
Right. Oh, I know I don't want to stop.
I know. And I know I've seen you do a monologue or 2 before.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the characters you do, and what made you start doing monologues, Rosalie? Because you can tell a story.
The first one and the main one I have done for, let's see, it's been 22 years now, 23 years, was Lottie Moon. And I did it because of a trip I made in 1996 with Delana O'Brien. Went to China, to Lottie Moon country, saw her house, saw the place in Pingdu where she lived, saw the work that she began that is still thriving in China. And I wanted to use her words to tell her story. So that is how it began. And then Lottie and I are real tight because we've been doing this now for all these years. I hope someday she will forgive me for some of the ways I may have misrepresented her, but I have used her words and as much as I can think of her heart and her thoughts to tell her story. The next one I did was Annie Armstrong. And I've got to tell you, she's a hard one to do. She really is. She was a wonderful leader. She was an amazing businesswoman, but a little difficult to deal with in some cases. And so it's sort of hard to get emotionally involved with her. I've done a monologue of Ann Judson, and I found that very draining emotionally. I've done one of, a time or two, I did one of Anne Graves, who started the First Little Society in Baltimore and got women to start meeting together when the Southern Baptist Convention met. And then I've done Kathleen Mallory. And I have vowed that I would never do Kathleen Mallory in Selma, Alabama, where they know her. We have one recording of her voice, and it's so beautiful. She says, "Our dear Heavenly Father." Oh, it's amazing.
Oh, that's perfect. Do you feel like doing the monologues and becoming the character has played out, and then your ability to do this with the books, to write as if you're that person?
There's a direct correlation. I look at both of them in the same way. It's that same sense and feeling, and it's draining because you feel like you're in that situation, and it becomes very real to you.
You definitely take on that character. When I've seen you, it's like I'm looking and listening to Lottie Moon or Annie Armstrong. Those are the 2 I've seen, and they're fabulous. You do such a wonderful job.
Well, I tell you, the first year I did Lottie, when I was older than she was when she died, it really gave me pause. I thought I was running on borrowed time.
Oh, wow. Well, what are some of the, I guess, what are the reasons? Why would you suggest that people read these books or even care about these leaders from their, so far back? Why would you encourage us to read?
Jennifer, I think a fun thing would be for somebody to read Hebrews 11 and the first 3 verses of Hebrew 12, the great faith chapter. And you look at the last 3 verses of chapter 11, and it talks about those who the world was not worthy of them, these wonderful, wonderful people of faith. But then it says, they without us are not made perfect. So we are part of the great cloud of witnesses. It's up to us to pass it on. That's why I think GAs and RAs and mission friends are so important. We need to pass it on to another generation. If we don't, the chain will be broken.
Tell us.
I can see that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Now, I was just going to get Rosalie to tell us a little bit about her her time on the mission field as well, and connecting all of these dots and helping pass it along.
This is one reason I want to tell the story for the children's sake and the grandchildren and we have one great grandchild now.
Ooh, congratulations.
Thank you. And he is named for Bob.
Oh.
Little Bobby. We haven't seen him yet. He's in Texas, but he FaceTimes with us every day. He's very advanced technologically.
Sweet little Bobby. Oh.
But
right.
we want him. We want them to know the story. And I think it's so important for all of us to share with that generation. I want the kids to know how it felt as an MK in China. Of course, our children were MKs. They know some of that feeling of you're not that culture, but you're not American culture. You're still a third culture. Where are you home? In some ways, I'm more at home in China than I am in America. When we came back to America, it was a foreign country to me. And I had to learn how to live in America. And we want the next generation to know the legacy and pass it on. Keep the message going. That's why I think it's so important to all of us. Each one of us has a legacy. I think a lot more about it now than I used to, even 10 years ago. But I'm thinking, how much more time do I have? I don't know, but I want the time to count.
Well, you've answered my question. I can see that there's a thread of history flowing through all these books, and we're part of it, aren't we?
We are, absolutely. That's why we need to read them. They are our ancestors. That's our story.
We forget that so often. All right, so now you also speak to not only to talk about your books, but about missions in general. So you're available to speak in churches again, maybe one day, right?
I hope so. I had to cancel a whole bunch in the last 3 months. So I hope so. I really miss it. I love to tell the story.
And as you've heard, she does the monologues, so she has that option. And then Rosalie's books are available. You have a website, I believe, right? Rosalie Hall Hunt?
Yes, RosalieHallHunt.com, yeah.
RosalieHallHunt.com. And all of her books are available there, and a little bit more about her bio and the information you might want to know about Rosalie. She also, go ahead.
Excuse me. Anytime anybody buys a book at the website, all the proceeds will go to mission giving so that people can be learning about missions and doing missions at the same time.
That is fantastic. What a great way to give back, even in the sense of to keep the writing going and give back through the writing and the reading.
It's fun.
And Rosalie, did you say when we can expect this new book about Kathleen Mallory? You said the cover's at the printer, so I'm wondering about a date.
I'm hoping by September, sometime in September, I'm hoping. Maybe at the time things will sort of open up and we can be together again, I could hope.
I know, right? And tell us the name of the book again. It's a feature on Kathleen Mallory, and the name is?
Guided by Grace, the Kathleen Mallory story.
Guided by Grace. All right. Well, be sure to check out all of Rosalie's books, RosalieHallHunt.com. And that's RosalieHallHunt.com. Rosalie, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Debbie. And it's wonderful to see your face.
I know, we miss you. We can't wait to see you again soon.
Great to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Rosalie.
See
All
you.
right. And goodbye to all of you. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week.